we live? Okay. This is Senate Appropriations, and we are going to be taking testimonies from the interim Secretary of Education regarding after-school programs and the testimony. And I know you went into education yesterday. Obviously, this committee, I don't know if you've heard my comments, but we have created ourselves, sort of put ourselves in a box when we didn't create a special fund. And we repealed the notwithstanding language that came with that funding in the cannabis bill when it was passed. So we obviously are in a situation where people are giving different interpretations or have different background information. And we wanted to hear, we did not deal with this in the BAA that we passed out, but our plan is to do an amendment to address this. And so we would like to have you sort of review your testimony that you provided and make sure everybody has got the same kind of background information. And so sorry we kept you waiting. We seem to not always be on time, and we will honor your firm stop. We know you have to leave a little before 4. So we do have a copy of your testimony that you sent us, and would welcome your perspective on the current situation and the best way to address it. And any areas that you see that there's misunderstanding, we're hearing from all, the Principals Association, from the superintendents, et cetera, around what they think the law is or should be. And what we're trying to do is look at what is the current policy and statute, and also the special fund that, in hindsight, the House passed last year. We did not. If we had only concurred with the House, we would not have this problem. And so I'm feeling a lot of responsibility for where we are. So the question is, how do we move forward here? So appreciate your thinking and your testimony, and any points that you would like to make as we're trying to address this situation that you brought to our attention back last fall.
Wonderful. Thank you, Madam Chair, and hello and good afternoon, committee members. It's nice to see you again. For the record, my name is Heather Boucher, and I'm the Interim Secretary of Education. I will start by apologizing if you can hear a barking dog. I am working from home this afternoon, and apparently a very scary deer is on the property. My dog has gone into Cujo mode. Can you hear me?
Yes, we had a paper bag that was blocking our screen a bit, so sorry about that.
Oh no, that's great. So yes, thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the Agency of Education today. I'm happy to clarify our position on our proposed BAA language, which we're also very open to. I think that there's some other potential amended language that's been drafted. And of course, answer any questions that committee members may have for me. So as Madam Chair said, we had back in the fall realized that in a surprise to us at the AOE, we hadn't realized when this when the budget bill was passed last session, we had, I think, made sort of just there was a lot of turnover also at the agency leadership, as you might recall. And so we kind of, I think, just assumed that the money would go where it was supposed to go from our perspective to run this mixed delivery grants program, which is, I would say, the latest in a long history of collaborative endeavors between the General Assembly and the administration on really bringing bringing disparate, both federal and state, unique pots of money together to really try to what we call blend and braid funds to really make sure that we are achieving true universal after school, outside of school, summer vacation programs for students or children and youth, same thing. So We had recommended some language in the BAA to start, or at least, what we thought was a good attempt to get these funds where they needed to go. And then we also reiterated the three aspects of the mixed delivery system grant requirements from last year's big bill. I think it was Act 72, 78. I apologize. As
78.
well, 78, as well as some operational costs, which we were grateful for. They are allowing the agency to fund 2 positions full-time to actually lift this program. I just signed off on some paperwork for the first of those positions, so fingers crossed they will accept and we'll be ready to go. So just again, like Section B aligns really clearly with the language that was passed by the legislature, which we thought we were all kind of on the same page. So we requested the proposed language from our perspective simply to fix the language from the big bill that we thought actually it might have been a mistake, or we weren't really sure why or how it ended up into that these cannabis tax revenue funds ended up into the education fund. At the time, we thought, well, probably just because it's being administered by the Agency of Education, and so it makes sense that you would just put those into the education fund. I don't know those details, and in some sense, it's where it is now. But that was we actually thought it was perhaps a mistake, and so when we saw.
Actually, that was the only place to put it, because we had all the other sales tax revenues went into the education fund to help fund just our public education system. So without sales tax that was earmarked to go into a special fund, it just went in with all the other sales tax revenue.
Yeah, and I think we probably just didn't have time to go over the details of that, because what I would say is, despite I think what is being argued now, that there's some attempt to kind of like strip the funds out of the ed fund and harm LEAs in that process. I don't think that was ever, from the administration's perspective, the intent of these funds. The program was never meant to be funded through LEAs solely. And so that's been confusing, and I'm not sure. It's creating some silos among LEAs versus community partners, which I think is really a shame. The whole point of this grant, I think, for all of us is, again, to fill in gaps. We're still going to offer 21C monies. Those are federal dollars. It's a great program. It's a robust, wonderful program. We currently have about 20 SUs that have 21C programs. That's less than half of our districts that have 21C programs. And those are typically not in every school within a district. And so part of that challenge is that we are a small state. And so we get what are called, which I'm sure this committee knows, small state minima, federal allocations for federal grants. And we get that for 21C, and it just doesn't stretch as far as we would like. So the beauty of having these cannabis revenue funds is that it gives us flexibility. It gives us the ability to not have to require quite as stringent paperwork requirements, quite as stringent reporting requirements that federal dollars involve. That doesn't mean we don't have safety precautions in place. We have a robust state granting program that we have to actually, through Bulletin 3.5, actually have to have all a robust set of protections and accounting issues and those kinds of things. Because that's been kind of like tossed about as well, that there's no way to monitor or keep track of what's going on if it's not an LEA. That's not true, actually. We actually, with ESSER funds funded in partnership, I would say, with this committee, members of this committee, the Act 112 grants, which were for mental health expansion. And we have a number of both LEAs and nonprofit entities, designated agencies that received those grant funds. And we've had no trouble monitoring them or doing the usual way we would actually make sure that the work is getting done as it should be.
I wanted to just highlight that because that's one of the things that people are concerned that somehow there isn't any mechanism of oversight or accountability. If you go the grants to nonprofits and that accountability somehow is less than what you have for the LEAs. The Act 112 and the mental health expansion, do those funds go to the DAs directly?
Not solely the DAs, but yes, I believe at least a DA got one. I'd have to go back and check, but it was definitely a combination of nonprofits such as the DAs and LEAs.
And so the agency is making payments to the DAs for that purpose?
I'd have to go back and look, but we have a grant with the entities, so with the nonprofits or the LEAs. It's not all going, in other words, through the LEAs. Like we have direct grants with those nonprofits.
So there's another precedent of where money is flowing.
Absolutely.
From the agency to nonprofits, in this case, the designated agencies.
Absolutely, and that was my point.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you.
You're very welcome. So the other piece I will say is so the concerns that we have are if we were to which we would consider substantial change in the way that this grant was conceptualized. And it's again, really the next step from a multi-year collaborative effort to actually really build a tapestry using multiple sources of funding, using multiple types of organizations to, at the local level, allow the flexibility for local entities to make that decision about what it should look like in their region or their community. And one of the challenges that we hear quite often is that our schools are really tapped out in terms of capacity, and that's true. So in some sense, we thought this is great to have this mixed delivery system because when schools want to partner with someone or if an entity like a Boys and Girls Club or a library or a community-based organization that is really focused on certain historically marginalized youth or children wants to partner with a school, if they have access as an applicant, they can actually take the burden of actually then running that program in partnership with the schools. So we actually think it's very important that we leave it that flexible so that any and all nonprofits and LEAs can apply. We're amenable to thinking about ways to, ensure that there are conversations happening. If there's a concern that folks are going to get left out, I think that would be something we could think about. Like, so maybe to apply, they have to consult. I mean, we would have to change the grant application right now, which is not really great, but it's something to consider. So, maybe they have to all consult with each other and then figure out who the fiscal agent is going to be. I think that there's some real concern in the nonprofit world that if the sole fiscal agents, as it is right now when it's in the ed fund, can be LEAs, it's just really going to restrict, number one, the types of organizations, meaning those that already have existing partnerships with schools, and so there won't be any chance for new programs that might be high quality to contribute. And then also, I think there's a concern that it puts a lot of pressure on the LEAs because then they do have to organize everything. They have to be the fiscal agent and so on and so forth.
How could they're normally not doing competitive grants. These are competitive grants, right?
No, well, yes.
If you had more applicants than we've got cannabis revenues, then you would have to, and because there's language there that you can't overspend the available money. So that gets you into the having to rank and having your advisory committee, I would think, to help determine how to score these applications.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And because we have 3 priority points, the way the application is written right now, they have to meet 2 out of 3, but 1 is actually a concrete partnership between the school district or schools and a community organization. The other is about serving historically marginalized children and youth students, and then the other is about really expanding slots and programming in areas which we absolutely have, despite our best efforts in the state where there really isn't a lot going on in terms of after school, despite the best efforts of schools and community partners right now.
So, in your testimony that you gave, you identified your concerns about, that seems to be sort of the ideological debate that everything has to flow through the LEAs, as the solution to this. But it got into, as you say, severely limit local options and the flexibility. I guess Senator Sears can speak most eloquently, because part of these programs for kids over age 12 that are not in the, say, a childcare subsidized program. Many of them are teens, and teens do sometimes their relationships in their schools are a little bit strained at times or whatever. And so having a place to go, or where there's a focus on delinquency prevention of the most at-risk behaviors or whatever, seem to be one of the advantages. And you've kind of talked about it, and that is new programs that might appear. And I guess that's your innovation.
Our intent, certainly back when we passed the bill, was to have innovative, evidence-based programs that would focus on the hours of 3 p.m. I think it was to 6 p.m. when it's the highest level of juvenile crime. Realize serious crime happens 24/7, but generally with juveniles, a lot of it happens between those hours, 3 to 6. And so I was kind of surprised when this issue cropped up this year. I thought it was pretty settled that we wanted innovation, we wanted creativity, and we wanted geographic distribution of the funds so that kids in Manchester have the same opportunity as kids in Burlington. And that's a big concern when you leave it to the local LEA. For me.
Yeah, well, and also underserved areas of the state are express policy of the use of these funds. So
we completely agree with everything that's just been said.
Good.
Yeah.
I don't think I think that in fact, your testimony, and your perspective and what you've outlined here, and you presented yesterday to the education committee, is sort of, it's very complementary to our thinking and looking at the existing policy that is clearly articulated in the legislation that we've passed. It's just how to take designated funds that ended up almost by default into the education fund, because we didn't somehow, if we can't extract them because the repeal of the notwithstanding language happened, and we didn't create a special fund, which we, if you look at the definition of special fund, is clearly aligns with what we're seeing here, and that is funds that revenues that were raised and were designated for a very specific purpose, and that purpose has been articulated in statute. So that's but there's something that seems to have been created that, because by default they got in, they aren't available to the public education sphere, because they come with the statutory constraints on how the funds can be used. So there's some I guess, just by virtue of ending up in the ed fund by default, has raised all of these concerns that somehow we're taking money out of the ed fund that really belongs to the local education agencies and, or they, it should be under their control, or they know more about, we've been getting a lot of or they know more about curriculum. But, some people would say these are not academic programs. These are programs that are intended to provide supervision and activities and adult mentorship, so to speak, for kids that without it could easily be at risk of. Go ahead, so Senator Sears.
You covered the anti-discrimination statutes. They're automatically, we don't have to state that in the amendment, right?
But we're going to, because that's one of the
But
big concerns.
I know, but we didn't, it's automatic that
Well,
you can't get a grant if you're gonna discriminate.
that would be the language, but don't forget, we have Jen Carney here, and that gets into maybe some
Well,
of the,
can you get a grant if you discriminate?
well, we do have a court case upon appeal, so and that relates to just the tuition of,
Well, we've got one in,
yeah,
In
I
my
think you know,
district,
so I think you know what that is.
yeah, do.
But we just to affirm that that these
Yeah,
programs
we're
are
just
not.
putting in
Yeah.
kind of
And it-
belt and suspender
Yes,
type
absolutely.
language.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you. Secretary Boucher, I have a question on page 2 of your testimony, when you go through the different years and the dollar amounts. Just to
Yes.
confirm my understanding, and the 4 million in 21 and the 4.7 million in 22, 23. That was the same mixed delivery. That was to both LEAs and non-LEAs, whoever applied pretty good grants through those
Could you-
two.
Could you
Program.
repeat that one again? I'm sorry, Senator. Could you repeat which one in particular again?
The 4 million in 21 and the 4.7 in 22, 23.
The ESSER money.
So the ESSER funds in 2021 were not for LEAs, they were for partners, because the LEAs had the 90% of ESSER funds, if you'll recall, at their own
They have
disposal.
their own. Okay.
Right. And I did an analysis back around then, so it's very rusty now, looking at for 2021 and 22, no, excuse me, for ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, how much of the proposed. So when those local plans came in from the LEAs for what they were going to spend their ESSER grants on, at that point, they were totaling $13 million that they were going to be using of those ESSER dollars at the LEA for summer after school and related expenses. So that was very encouraging. And that was even before ARP ESSER, which then required, for instance, the state to use that third tranche of money, which is under the 2.8, and that should actually be doubled, and I apologize. It's 2.8, and this did go just to LEAs for summer and after school grant. For summer, there was 2.8, and then for after school, there was another 2.8. So that was a requirement of the third pot of ARP ESSER money that had to go out to the LEAs. So I think these are great questions.
4.7 in 22, 23. How did that go up?
That was I think that total of like around 8 million was to the nonprofits.
Wow.
Again, because there was a significant amount of money that had we thought was already being deployed
Right.
through the local the LEA's own ESSER funds.
Right, that makes sense. And then, and can you remind me how much 21C is per year on average?
Gosh, I'd have to go back and look. I know we have like about 50 or 20 sites, but I'd have to go back and look. I'd have to go back and look at I haven't looked at our budget broken down at that, so I apologize.
Okay.
But it's not going to be in like the double digits of millions or anything. At most, it's going to be low single digit millions.
Okay. One more question. On the chart on page 4,
Yes.
I understand it completely. One, I wasn't sure what the y-axis was.
It's a
And
complicated one.
So what is the y-axis? And then how can a county be measured in all four categories? I just didn't understand what this graph was telling me.
Yeah, so it's definitely a rough cut, and the data that I had to use this are not really ideal. So the data, these are 2020 data. This was looking at comparing public school enrollment, K through 6, so K through 6 students. So it doesn't actually get at coverage or options for older youth, as Senator Sears was talking about. I was trying to get a rough approximation. Can we actually look at some way to assess kind of capacity, coverage, and then what would still be needed? And so that's what this is. So I looked at enrollment, K-6 in the public schools in both the town and that county. And also we had some, and then also mapping that to the number of slots for CDD regulated childcare after school programs, not childcare, but the after school components of their programs. So right there, that's we're looking at like some very, it's not the most sophisticated set of analyses, let's just say, but it was meant to really give us just a kind of a treetops level of what's going on. Then we also had data not on enrollment, but we had data that was on, we don't collect specific enrollment on students in 21C because of the way the federal requirements are set up. What we have is like a measure of whether the student was regularly attending 21C. So it's still apples to oranges. So what I did was try to look at okay, so the four categories are if you have very low coverage, kind of medium coverage, or very high coverage. And so if you take a look at, for instance, Chittenden County, we always pick on Chittenden, but the large majority of their towns offer medium coverage. And by towns, what that means is there's access to 21C or to licensed after school slots. So there's a lot of other types of programs and experiences that we don't have data on at the state. If you contrast that to, for instance, Franklin County or Windham County, the vast majority of those towns are offering a low coverage for after school opportunities of those two types. So that would be less than 25% of students have slots or are regularly attending 21C.
So that's what the y-axis is a percentage.
It's the percentage. It's the percentage of coverage. It's the percentage of towns that kind of meet that coverage criteria.
So the bars in each county really are differentiating in terms of the towns within those counties, how they stack up.
Yes. And so I think what's most striking is that we have a lot of towns with low offerings in terms of 21C and in terms of licensed childcare capacity. Again, this is rather crude. There are other types of programs that are funded in other ways that we're not capturing here. What I will say, and I'd be more than happy to come back in. There's a whole data set this was just one piece that I pulled from it, but there's a whole data set that I thought is fascinating because we looked at this by SU and by school and could really show that even within particular SUs, there's some real discrepancy in terms of what options are available for students. And not just with respect to 21C, also with respect to licensed after school spots. Some of that has to do with building capacity, for instance. Some of it might have to do with, who knows, codes or things like that. But that was what was really striking to us, is that there's tremendous variability and inequity. And that's what we're trying to get at.
So the 21C, is that a capped funding stream?
Yes, we get every year the small state minima. Occasionally it goes up a little bit.
And then do the LEAs have to apply and then you distribute it based on a competitive grant if you have more applications?
Yes.
And when you were talking about the Senator Sanders in 21, were those grants that you said were for non-LEAs, did that funding come to the agency and then you made the grants to the non-LEAs?
In 2021, because we were still in COVID, this was actually, we actually did a contract with Vermont After School for those funds to actually, they deployed the grants program.
And they made the grants directly to the, like the Boys and Girls Club or King Street
Yep.
program. Okay, that's all I
Public
wanted.
libraries, municipalities for rec centers. Yep.
All right, that's very helpful in terms of the history is certainly variable in terms of how the money has flowed and
I think we've tried to be very creative when we have funds to try and blend and braid in ways that really maximize opportunities for students. The other thing I will note, if a program wanted to expand 21C or build on to 21C with this cannabis revenue funds, they would certainly, that would probably be a great application. So I think that there's some maybe assumptions that are being made that are not quite true. Floating around, right? So there's nothing that would restrict an LEA that is trying to expand its 21C programming that it couldn't because it reached the cap, because there are limitations in terms of that full amount allocated to the state. It would be a little tricky, I would say, only in the sense that, again, the intent, I think, of these cannabis funds is that it is more flexible. You don't have the same level of reporting requirements. There are definitely reporting requirements, as we do with all state dollars, but it isn't quite as rigid in terms of the requirements if you're using state dollars.
okay. Well, it seems like what we were talking about is create or expand. So you're talking about you can maybe expand the program by taking the 21C money and then apply for this cannabis and expand your program. That's one option. Okay. Other questions of the secretary? We appreciate your making yourself available today. We did not include anything in the budget adjustment that we passed out yesterday, but our goal is to see if we can get ourselves in a place where this money can go, which we think is the right fiscal construct, and that's a special fund, of which we have 300. So they're not something unique. They're fairly common, and somehow address and your testimony. I think you were trying to address all the concerns that are coming your way that this situation has sort of generated. So we appreciate your and your dog has been very obedient. We haven't heard one.
I think the deer moseyed on. It is quite amazing. He acts as though there's a pack of grizzlies back outside, and it's usually a kind little deer. Anyway,
Well,
he's
Texas mama.
well, it's like James Herrick book, Only One Wolf. You remember that? Or Moses, so spent many hours. Thank you very much for.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
So at this point, I think I'm going to ask Jen Harvey, who is joining us, to look at put some language in an amendment that we could offer. As I said, last year, the House actually passed in their budget bill language to create a special fund. And we were very sensitive to special funds, and so the original bill, the cannabis bill, had the revenues, dedicated them, and then had a notwithstanding provision. Through error, and it's hard to reconstruct how you broke your leg, sometimes. we repealed the notwithstanding language and did not create a special fund, and that is why we're where we are. So this amendment would, before we do this, I think it is helpful, because I asked, joint fiscal, a special fund, this is definition in law. A special fund is a fund created to account for specific revenues earmarked to finance particular or restricted programs or activities, which is the case here. There's within the law, it's very clear that these cannabis sales tax revenues are allocated to either create or expand these programs. And so they earmarked or created by express enactment of the General Assembly to account for and manage those proceeds. So this is very clearly the circumstances or the type of revenues that are envisioned for a special fund to do. And it's really a fiscal construct that we are talking about here. It's not a policy change. It is how we make sure that funds that are by statute designated or allocated are accounted for and managed.
So can you commingle other funds
No,
with them?
No, the special fund is, no,
Just for that special.
just for that revenue source that is specific earmarks. And that's what we're talking about. The revenues that are earmarked in the cannabis bill are the sales tax revenues on cannabis products. And the statute is, I think, quite clear. I'm sure Jen has looked at it, but I think that the statute that clearly allocates these revenues, that language was in the cannabis bill.
So what happens to other dollars that go into after school programs? So would you have two accounts?
Yeah, I mean, sure, that's what the secretary was talking about. You could have your 21C, so you're braiding available, and so oftentimes 2 or 3 funding streams are braided together to support an activity. And this would be one, but when this bill got passed, and it came with a lot of controversy and a lot of concern about the impact on particularly at-risk youth, there was this provision to allocate sales tax revenue to these programs. So, Jen, do you want to, but last year, what we're trying to build on is exactly what the House passed in their budget last year. And it created a special fund, and this is really, there's been concern about discrimination, and so there's some additional language, and I'll let Jen Covey run through what this amendment could look like, to get us out of this fiscal jail, so to speak.
Good afternoon, Jennifer Carvey, Legislative Council. So we are looking at some language I think is on your website and you have in front of you. So it is very similar to language that was passed in the House proposal last year's budget.
This current fiscal year budget.
Yes, I'm sorry, but the budget bill that was passed
Yep.
last year. Yes, but the FY24 budget. So the first change, so what you don't see is that language had cited, it said pursuant to 2020 action resolves numbers 164 was the big cannabis bill in 2020, which dedicates the cannabis sales tax revenue to support grant programs for the expansion of summer and after school programs with an emphasis on increasing access in underserved areas of the state. It takes that language out because last year, those provisions of Act 164 were in fact repealed. So it doesn't make sense to say pursuant to something that's been repealed.
Even though it was repealed.
So we just start instead of a universal after school, so the universal after school in the language that was handed out. The universal after school and summer special fund is created to be managed by the Secretary of Education. The cannabis sales tax revenue shall be transferred to the Universal After School and Summer Special Fund. The Secretary shall use the assets in the fund as follows. So other than that intro language, we're tracking exactly the House passed language from last year's Act 78. And then shall use the assets as follows. 1, to set up programs to support the expansion of universal after-school and summer programs with a focus on underserved areas of the state. Again, that's same as the House passed language. 2, cannabis sales tax revenue shall be used to support a mixed delivery system for after-school and summer programming. Eligible recipients can be public, private, or nonprofit organizations. And that is the same language that was in the House passed version.
And actually, some of this language we did include in.
Yes, and much of this is currently in 16 VSA 4018, which will be.
So
repealed
that's
at the
my
end of
question,
this.
why do we have to add that?
Because you are repealing 16 VSA 4018, so that there are different ways you could approach doing this. This is one of them. So instead of, so you're doing something that is not in the Ed Fund chapter. It's in the case, just a standalone piece of session law, so it'll,
We're revealing that later in this.
and you're repealing at the end of this document, you're repealing 16 VSA 48.
Just because we're putting it in a different place, you gotta,
You're taking it out of the Ed Fund chapter.
Yeah.
So that there is not that connection anymore.
Yeah.
All right, so then the A and B language, grants may be used for technical assistance, program implementation, program expansion, program sustainability, and related costs. And B, funds may be used to directly target communities with low existing capacity to serve youth in after school and summer settings. That also is the same as the House passed language from last year.
Was that in our budget too, I'm wondering?
this language all looks like.
In your budget or in,
In the budget that finally got passed, a lot of this language got included, including the advisory committee.
right, in what got passed in 16, basic 2018, I believe that is.
This-
Act 78.
The only change is in sub B, the language in statute, says grants may be used to directly target communities rather than funds may be used.
Can somebody explain the technical assistance to me? It doesn't sound like something we should be renting out.
Instead, right there, right along.
I know, but it doesn't mean that it's, now that we're changing it,
I don't think we should change anything myself, no, because we invite more alterations on the floor if we can't say that. That we're presenting it as exactly as it came out.
what is technical assistance?
It's language that is often included. It's for assistance in implementing the programs and complying
That's already
with
there.
reporting requirements in I don't know what was specifically intended in this instance.
You don't know what it is.
Yeah.
You do? What is it?
If you get technical assistance or something, somebody that knows more than you do is offering you some help, technical help to run the program.
It helps to write the grant
Yeah.
and help with program
That would be a
design.
Could be IT.
technical-
Yeah, could.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
All right, but I'll live with it. Just because it's been there doesn't mean it's right. Bill, and
yeah, put a bill in.
One year ball.
your rules don't allow us, put rules in place, that don't allow.
You could go to the rules committee.
Yeah.
We're getting a lot of sympathy,
I see that, and
but I'm gonna suggest we keep
All
going.
right, and so yes, a lot of this language.
keep a close eye on the miscellaneous judiciary bill at the last minute.
Down through answering technical assistance.
No lawyers for you.
So a lot of this language was, yes, also enacted in 16 VSA 4018, which I think was enacted in the budget. So sort of full circle there. So the new language in the paper you're looking at is in subdivision 2C, which says the award of grants and any subsequent contract or written agreement issued pursuant to the award of a grant shall require the grantee to comply with 9 VSA section 4502 regardless of whether the grantee meets the definition of a place of accommodation under 9 VSA 4051-1.
And that's all,
That is, right, that is all new.
but that's,
That's a perfectly defensible addition, given people's.
Yeah, people's concern about this from the drawings.
All right, and then subdivision D is again the same as it was in the house and I believe in
they're already spending more than we.
that the agency may use up to $500,000 for administrative costs to allow for the support of the grant program and technical assistance to communities. This could include subcontracts to support the grant. program.
Technical assistance again.
Well, we'll look at all the low numbers. And they're still using the 500K. Imagine what it'll take to get the numbers up. They'll be coming for a supplemental next year.
He's talking about the grant.
The what?
The grant was that is the question.
Excuse me, the interim commissioner secretary. God.
All right, so then we have the advisory committee, so there
Commissioner Day and-
The advisory committee
was
is in the
still, and would continue to be an advisory committee created to support the secretary in administering the funds. The agency will provide administrative and technical support to the committee, and the committee would be composed of, and I think the people on it are the same in statute, the names of the departments and agencies are spelled out here and there. In a more abbreviated form, which is how they appeared in the House proposal last year. So we have committee being composed of the state's chief prevention officer, the DCF commissioner or designee, DDH commissioner or designee, DMH commissioner or designee, ANR secretary or designee, ACCD secretary or designee, the Vermont After School Executive Director or designee, and a representative from the governor's office.
And this was language that the House had passed that we took out in our effort to, or,
well, some of it we kept in.
Yeah, we kept this,
We kept.
oh, kept the advisory committee.
The advisory committee, I've asked Grady to identify what is here in the amendment that is really, the same as current
Right, so
law.
I will tell you, there's an annual reporting requirement that is in the statute in current law
That's
that's
the one in
not
November,
in,
the-
right, that is not in what the House has passed last year and is not in this
but
draft.
it would still be in statute anyway.
No, because you're repealing the statute.
Oh,
So then we should add it.
We should have.
Okay, you wanna add that?
Well, but you're making a change.
Right,
That
that's,
wasn't in the
that's,
House passed version.
that was not in the House passed version of the language.
You can change for a report, you can change technical assistance.
I'm looking at H 494, as passed by the House last year, and it did not include, it just ended after a representative from the governor's office.
Oh, that's,
So I'm happy to add it back in if you like.
I mean, it's kind of like those other reports. You can always just get the information. if you
Yeah.
ask for it.
Well, the report was not just a report, it was, it required the agency annually by November 15th to submit a plan to fund grants in furtherance of the proposal, the purposes in subsection A and report outcomes data on the grants. Also report on, yes, some of it you can certainly ask them.
If it becomes important, we could do it as a big note.
Can we repeal, everything but that? In other words, repeal the statute?
Not really, because it refers back to the provisions of subsection
Okay.
A, use it just a standalone.
Okay, then I would suggest maybe that we put it in,
we should.
that we should, because it's asking for data on how they're doing with it and what they're planning for going forward. And if we eliminate that, I could see people saying,
I mean, another option would just be to move this section, the existing section 16 VSA 4018 to a different part of Title 16 that is not in the
Yeah.
education fund.
but we would have to have it in this amendment anyway.
You would,
Be its own amendment.
you could recodify, I mean, you could just redesignate it.
Put it anywhere.
Isn't it easier if we just put it here in the amendment and then repeal the statute as we?
You certainly can. This is just my only point, just that
I thought you didn't want to change it.
Well, we're not changing because that's.
Because I wanted to change, but you are changing.
That's current law. So we're not changing current law by keeping it in. If we,
Just like the,
if we.
just like the advisory committee is current law, and we're keeping it in.
Right.
Yeah, I had a question on
I'm sorry.
So,
I like you and I won't choose this one, you want the floor, but.
Chief Prevention Officer, Monica
It's not
Potter.
quite.
my question.
In other words, if we get rid of what is an existing, requirement that they have to report their results and come up with a plan, then people might reasonably ask, why are you eliminating this stuff that will give us insight into the program? But if we let it stand as current law, because it is current law, then no one can say we're changing it, because we're not. It is current.
I'll let you explain that on the floor, or Senator Kitchen can explain it on the floor.
Sure.
I got the big bites.
I think what the president pro tem is trying to do is
Inelegant.
keep this as near as he can to what existing law says with its few changes.
Except some of this is non-existing law because we,
And that's where the house.
and that is, so we need to go back and identify what clearly was in the House language, which A is pretty much,
I think
except
Grady has a,
So the reporting language, that's the last bit in statute currently. That language is identical to what was in the House passed bill as section E 500.2.
it's a different section.
It's a separate section,
okay, oh, good.
but it's what that language was in the House bill.
so that solves our.
Yeah, I was gonna say, where else would have?
Yeah.
We're going to go.
Have to give Jack like.
I know.
So you're gonna get us in trouble with that one again.
What-
You have to say the chair was the jackwagon. I don't know what happened, but Stephanie asked, and Brady looked at the memos that around, don't we need to keep that notwithstanding? And the response was no,
Well,
so,
we call it a big bill for a reason. If we only made one mistake like that, that's pretty damn amazing.
yeah.
That's
You weren't perfect,
No, nobody's perfect. Not even.
not even me.
All right, so we would still repeal section 4018 of 16 VSA.
Okay, so I can add in, it's slightly different language in E 500.2, partly because it was amending the Act 164 language. But I can certainly put the current version back in.
And when I get up, I want to be able to identify what is current law.
Yeah.
And what, and so it's not only what the House passed and we defer it referencing the language, but then what in fact the House included and we agreed with, and so where there's not, even though that section is repealed, it's being replaced in exactly the same language, I guess.
Yes, very similar. I can probably do a markup version.
That would be very low.
So then we get to, the next piece of the language we have is labeled as section 28, will probably be 27A. And this is going into the FY 24 budget and redesignating the funds that, the source of the funds for the after school grant program and the 509 for being education fund being separate funds.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna let Grady speak to the next one. If you don't mind.
Is that section 53? Yeah, so this is inserting in Act 78 E 101. language, transferring funds from the education fund to the newly created universal after school and summer special fund. The current, we need to check with the Department of Finance and Management to make sure that this number reflects the current dollar amount.
This is the money that we're having to unlock to fund grants.
2.8 million.
We think it's a bit more than that now. But that's what Grady needs to check.
So if we file this amendment tonight, how long will it take to check that number?
I'll reach out to Finance and Management. I can call Aaron Brodor and get and see what he says.
So hope is
Yeah.
the hope is
Yeah.
Okay. And Jen will give us, walk it through, so because make people understand that a lot of
Grady, do
these
you want that?
taxes for existing current law, still being moved.
Yeah.
I guess.
I would say the most contentious parts of it are already in law.
Except the special fund.
Right, but I mean, you know, the intention and the mixed delivery system,
That's been current law right from the beginning.
I don't, but, you know, there's
Yeah, I
not
know.
a general understanding of, or acceptance of that.
And I probably need a chronology. I think I do have that chronology. When we passed the cannabis bill and so forth.
Yeah, this was. This wasn't the legalization. Remember, we did legalization before we regulated tax and regulated. So that's two completely different.
Well, I think we're doing the one that was done in 2020.
Right, yes.
Because she had that tax.
Right, it was the tax and regulate in order to have a more predictable market for the consumer, the Vermont consumer.
You know, that's all the numbers and fund transfers, reversions and reserves, that's just in here to give context to number two. There's nothing happening there.
Right, so I think what will happen is, it's just gonna strike out, so you can't see it here yet, but what's gonna happen is, I'm gonna strike out section 53, I think, from the bill, the version you voted out yesterday, and replace it with a new section 53, so this will include all of the items and add the universal after school and summer special fund, but you don't wanna lose the things you already said there.
Now, the amendment has to have all of our names on it, but you can't do it.
You can't do a committee amendment, it has to have it because you don't have the bill anymore. But it can have as many
And I
committee
hope
names.
this,
Yeah, I want to be on.
and I know Senator Lyons has got a meeting, but she will want to be.
No, I'm just gonna do that and just like sneak it into a bill. I'm gonna do my best to lose the impersonation. Get it into the bill after we've had an agreement on that else.
I was talking to him today, he denies the nickname, the Dark Prince. Because I was never a dog.
I remember when Senator Mazza stood up and said, I wish I had.
All right, so if you want.
This was not in the conference report I signed.
So the last section's on page 4. There is the first section there is changing the name of the chapter in Title 32 UK Chapter 207 to go from cannabis excise tax to be cannabis excise tax and cannabis sales tax revenue.
We didn't have that there before.
I don't believe so. I think it's just called cannabis excise tax.
Oh.
And then it would add a new section in that chapter, cannabis sales tax revenue, initial after school and summer special fund, saying that revenue from the sales and use tax imposed by chapter 233 of this title on retail sales of cannabis or cannabis products in Vermont shall be deposited into the universal after school and summer.
Dropping the word
I thought.
learning.
Because that's.
No, I think we should.
Yeah,
I
and
just
the
wanna
house
make sure.
did, the house did. They didn't, we're using the titling of the,
I just was,
yeah. no.
making sure that we're dropping the word learning.
That was in the house version.
Right, we're
Yeah.
just going with universal after school and summer special fund in the first part instead of saying language there.
And, universal after school and summer, the title must be missing something.
It's what it said.
On page 1,
Yep.
universal after school
And
and
so,
summer. No, yeah,
And just,
yeah,
seems like something's missing from the title.
I think
Well,
it was,
In A, you use.
that is what it was called in the house. In the house pass version of it, so that's what I went with. Yes, I agree that it
That's
seems
what they
like
called
something,
it, then it's fine with
I
me.
agree, it seems like something is missing.
All right, it's
Um,
fine,
Would you like to call it
no,
no,
special fund?
I wanna call it
No.
exactly what it is.
no,
Okay, so,
No, named it children, I think, fall and summer.
and then the last piece is that repeal, so it's repealing 16 VSA 2018, which is entitled After School and Summer Learning Programs.
I thought the.
and we have to repeal that because,
Because that's where it is currently in the ed fund that's causing, or ed fund chapter that is causing all of the issues.
To be honest.
Yes.
I thought he put the money in that. Now it's going into the universal
Yeah.
after school.
Special fund.
special funds.
Special,
Did that change to Title 32 about cannabis excise tax? Does that change it? Because I noticed another parts of that title. It's called cannabis excise.
I think this is for the name of the chapter, so we're just reflecting that there's something that's happening in the chapter that deals with the tax other than.
Hope someday they'll come up with a better name for it than after school and summer program.
Out of school.
After school.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah, that's what they're using. You know, some kind of just. Even better.
Some people call it the third phase, but I found that. Yeah.
So committee,
Homes.
we will, once we get this finalized, I'll check with Senator Lyons, but, in terms of being a sponsor,
yes, and I, spoke with the secretary of expecting the tax, the tax.
So this will be tomorrow. It'll come up.
and then,
It'll be after second reading or anything.
that's the
And the other, the housing will be.
third reading, and we've got to decide what we do.
Yeah. Before we dabble in, Jim's gonna do a all separate.
So are we finished then, once we get the amendment, I guess I'm the reporter. On behalf of the committee, but I would hope that some people who have had a lot of historical, almost, Secretary of the Senate,
Ready yet.
but soon.
But Jen is just making the changes and then.
Yes, I'm drafting it.
Yes. Stop it. Okay,
And Grady's checking on the number, just to let you know.
great.
So,
Madam Chair,
Yes.
should we take a vote or do we?
The number hasn't changed.
We'll all be on the.
we're all on the agenda, we're all the amendment.
Okay,
So they'll have all of our names.
perfect.
So at this point, I think we have finished for today. We're going to make the final decisions on what we do with homeless, NGA rules, before third reading.
Yes.